So let us begin, I guess, with within Orthodoxy itself. Hasidism is a movement that came about in the late 17th century as a response to a time when Judaism found itself in a very great dilemma, when Jews were having a hard time expressing themselves as Jews due to the nature of the circumstances, the oppression that took place in the times, the lack of ability for Jews to be able to be educated, and basically were breaking ranks and losing touch with Judaism. And what you had the scholars, and for a long time Judaism within Orthodoxy predicated itself on scholarship. People who basically were very well versed and knew a lot, that made you something within Judaism. And people who didn't just found no place for themselves. And at a time when people didn't have the opportunity to be educated and know, they found no place for themselves within the Jewish faith. And Hasidism, which began by, as some will know, the Baal Shem Tov, came to tell us that, and introduced a form of Judaism that taught that a Jew is a Jew, and that's not a question at all of how much you know and what great scholar you are. But that a Jew is a Jew by expressing himself in the best way of his ability and making the best effort he can. And one of the things about Shem Tov would always say is, God wants the heart. And that snowballed very quickly. The Hasidic movement, we know, became the dominant force within Orthodox Judaism in Europe, very soon after it was introduced. So it's a way of serving God more fervently. It's an approach to Judaism. And really some people ask the question, within Orthodoxy, did Judaism evolve or not evolve? Because you all know that as Orthodoxy, we believe in a firm concept that tradition and halacha is what it...
Halacha is Jewish law.
A Jewish law, okay, right. And that is what Judaism is today as well. And we'll talk about that, I think, when we compare it to conservative and reform. The question is, of course, I don't think anybody would say that you should serve God without your brain, without your mind, just with your heart. But the question becomes, in a time when people intellectually are in a very low state, do they find themselves on the outside of their religion, or is there a way for them, of course with the emphasis on educating themselves, but in the meantime, and that's the motto of Chabad, the Chabad movement today, which is so different in a sense than the rest of the Orthodox movement perhaps, is that we come into a community, and we're an outreach movement, and we say to people, and everyone always asks this question, I mean, Chabad is an Orthodox synagogue, or an Orthodox movement. We also have a synagogue. The question is, how do I fit in there? I'm not Orthodox. I'm not even perhaps what they would say religious. And the answer is, that's precisely what Chabad is about. We encourage people. Of course you don't know, and you can't learn a religion like Judaism in one day or in 1 year. The emphasis is put, but come on in and start doing something. If you have your heart in the right intention, and you have your heart in the right place, and you want to learn and grow, you're doing your best. And the fact that you take on one mitzvah, one precept, and you do it, that is basically, at your level of knowledge, you are perhaps doing the best you can do. So you have your place within Judaism, even though you're not educated.
One of the distinctive features that I like very much about Hasidism is the notion of worshiping God through joy. Could you explain that a little bit?
Well, again, that goes back, I think, to the concept of there's a deep philosophical difference, I think, in the way Hasidism approaches the religion and perhaps other forms even within Judaism. And perhaps some consider that as fanatical, but it is a reality. And many times Hasidic movement, if you read the press, is considered the ultra or the fanatical wing of Judaism. But the Hasidic movement believes that serving God is not a part-time job. It's not something that you do as a supplement to your, whatever it is you were created to do in this world. We were here to have a family and to live, and of course we owe some thanks to God, so we go to synagogue and we put in our time, and the rest of the week or the rest of the month or the rest of the year, depending how often you go, you basically have free ticket. Hasidism emphasizes that every minute you live, you're living to serve God, and everything else is just so that you can do that. You work and earn a living so that you can take the energy and serve God in this world and do what you have to do. But it's not vice versa. You don't serve God so that, and many people ask the question, when they go into a religion, they always ask, what are the returns? Am I going to have a better life? And how long do you have to wait to start seeing the results? That's not the Hasidic approach. The approach is, serving God in itself is the essence. That's good. And there's great joy in that. Knowing that every day you live and everything you do, you're serving God. And the analogy, if I take a moment, is an analogy of two people who were climbing a mountain, carrying a very heavy sack on their shoulders. And there was a bystander. And one person was carrying the sack, and it was a hot day up the mountain, and he was kvetching. I don't know, it's a Jewish word, kvetch. But he was complaining.
That's a southern phrase.
Okay.
Fetching.
Kvetching. He was kvetching all the way up, and he was, oi, and oi. The other one was carrying the sack, and he was whistling a happy tune, and he was a very happy person. It was the same mountain, and it was an equally heavy sack, and the bystander was fascinated. And he said to one of them, he went up to the one that was kvetching, he said, you know, what is it? I see you're very unhappy. Well, what is it? He says, well, you know, I'm carrying a heavy bundle of bricks on my shoulder. I get paid $1 an hour, $2 an hour, and I bring this bundle of bricks up to the top of the mountain, and somebody else gets to build a nice house. And it's hot, and I shouldn't kvetch. What would you do? It made sense to him. So he said, well, I have to ask the other person why he was so happy. He goes over to the other person, and he says, I noticed you were carrying a very heavy bundle, and it's a hot day, and you seem to be very happy and excited. And so why is it? So he said, well, let me tell you. What I'm carrying on my shoulder is a bundle of gold and silver and diamonds and rubies, and I just uncovered a treasure. And I know the bag is very heavy, and it's very hard to carry it, but you know something? The heavier it is, the happier I am. And the analogy here is, if you approach Judaism as rubies and diamonds, or your religion for that matter, then in face of whatever challenge comes and whatever hardships you have, you smile, you're happy, it's exciting because you know this is very rewarding. If you look at it as a bundle of bricks that someone else is going to get to build a house with, then perhaps you need to be a little not as excited. You need to find reasons other than the religion itself to make you, what are the results? What are the benefits? This is a very hard thing to do. Am I going to have am I going to earn more money because I'm doing what God wants? Am I going to have a better life? We don't look at it that way. Judaism in itself is diamonds and rubies and gold, and every day you get to express that, you're very lucky, and you have a lot of joy in that.
I'm watching Jack. I think he's working on his sermon.
Yeah. Give me a closing poem, I'll have it now.
Jack, which brings me to my next subject, which Chabad was very much involved in, and that I would describe as a messianic yearning and longing. And in the newspaper a few weeks ago, we read about a possible announcement in New York by a number of Lubavitcher Hasidim that they felt that their rabbi was possibly the Messiah. And Yossi, maybe you can share with us, how does Chabad view the coming of the Messiah, and what is the role of the Jewish people or of righteous people in bringing the Messiah and so on?
I think that Chabad and Hasidic movement.
Let me interrupt. May I do that and ask you to define Chabad and Hasidism?
Okay.
What do those terms mean? Those words mean?
Okay, Chabad is a branch of a Hasidic group.
Okay.
Hasidic movement is a branch within the Orthodox movement as a whole. The Hasidic movement came into existence in the last several hundred years.
Right, but what is the name?
Hasidim?
Mm-hmm.
The literal translation for a Hasid means for righteous or kind, but that's only a name that became attached to this movement.
And Chabad, the definition?
Chabad is an acronym for the Hebrew word of Chachma, which means wisdom, Bina, understanding, and Da'at, which is knowledge. And that goes back to something we discussed earlier, that Chabad has a very deep philosophy and theology on religion. So Chabad, in addition to the Hasidic movement, which put a very strong emphasis on the emotional aspects of serving God, Chabad also encouraged strongly, and we talked about it earlier, the intellectual understanding of God, and a very deep intellectual understanding of God.
Okay, thank you for that. Now go back to the other question, if you will.
Excuse me. I don't think that the Hasidic movement or Chabad views the concept of Mashiach, of Messiah, any different within Judaism, any different than the Orthodox movement as a whole, or perhaps...
But don't you think they pursue it a little more?
Definitely. And that's the key here. And that goes back again to, we find, and I'm not trying to be negative about anything, but if you find that if Judaism is a burden, going back to what I said, there's a concept within some forms of Judaism of looking for the leniency. It's called a heter, looking for a way out of things. That concept doesn't exist because within halacha itself, within the Jewish structure of law, you can find loopholes and ways of avoiding things. One of the things that make Hasidim so different is they're always trying to do more as opposed to looking for a way around. And they take the law very literal, and perhaps even go one of the things of a Chassid, the word Chassid means in Pirkei Avot is one who goes beyond the call of duty. And that, I think, is where the word Chassid became synonymous with the Hasidic movement, is because they're always trying to go beyond the call of duty. And going back to the analogy I gave, if it's gold and it's diamonds and it's good, so if a little bit is good, more is even better. So I think when it comes to Mashiach, there's a number of elements that come in here that brings Chabad so much in these days, so pursuing it to such a great extent. First of all, part of being a Chassid, and in any Hasidic movement, is believing that there's a spiritual leader. Not just a rabbi in terms of a congregation hiring a rabbi, but a spiritual leader, which is a concept on itself, almost equal to Moses. There is a Moses in each generation. To Hasidim, that is their Rebbe. This is a man who is equivalent to a prophet. And I think Orthodoxy accepts, and specifically the Hasidic movement accepts, that when God created the world and he gave us commandments to follow the law, the rabbis, he had intended that there will be direction in each generation that we need to be guided. Even within halacha, even if we accept fully the law, there are times that we need to be guided in sense of where emphasis should be put. And as you go back to the Bible, where the Jews crossed the Red Sea and they sang the praises of God, it says, and they believed in God and in Moshe his servant, in the same breath. We're talking about God here. Where does Moshe come in? But there's a strong point being made that believing in God is believing in prophets, believing in strong spiritual leadership. The Rebbe has said that this is the generation of Mashiach. This is the Messianic era for the Jewish people, and he will come in this era. When Hasidim hear that, and Hasidim follow the Rebbe very, very, very strongly and very carefully, this meant to them that this is the time to bring the message to the world, that we are, and the Rebbe actually called that this message be brought to the world, that we are now in the Messianic era. So,
now, what signs would he give to substantiate that claim?
Well, first of all, the Rebbe has pointed to the things that are taking place in history, in our days, the falling of communism, and the concept that the world is now at a point of, we're talking in the United States about using the money from the money that we don't use for war to aid countries, and actually we've seen that this is the first time we had a military operation that wasn't geared on killing people, but it was geared on saving people, turning your swords to plowshares. This is something that was always synonymous with coming of Mashiach. But again, I don't think any person can take that and do that and say this is the Messianic era based on looking on history or current events and saying, well, it sounds like this is the time. there is a commandment and a mitzvah, a precept to accept the concept of Mashiach in all times, that he's coming in your time. Going back to Maimonides, who wrote Maimonides, whom you may be familiar with, wrote the first code of law going back over 800 years ago. And he discusses the concept of Mashiach, of Messiah with Judaism, and he says very strong words, that one who doesn't accept and believe and await the coming of Mashiach is one who doesn't only denounce the written law or the rabbinical law, but literally is a kofar be'ikar. He's a heretic and does not accept the biblical, the 5 books of Moshe. He doesn't believe in Moshe. That's a strong, this is going back 800 years ago.
Excuse me, Yossi, I have to. So let's go back, Yossi, in terms of Chabad. Why were there people that thought that the Rebbe might be the Messiah, and what did that even mean?
Well, again, going back to understanding, we use the word Messiah very loosely, and I think most people, I think within Judaism, this is certainly true, most people have mystified Messiah to something that's very remote. We almost use it in a way of when we want to say something will never happen. Oh, this will happen before Mashiach comes. This will, you know, it's a term of like, but really it was contrary to what the basic, one of the 13 principles that Maimonides lays down of the Ikar. It's the foundation of Judaism, is to believe and await Mashiach every day. So, but we don't, because we don't, it's something of a nature that we don't understand, and we haven't put enough emphasis in the latest generations. I think people just don't know what to make of it. And if you learn the only way to really understand it is to go back and learn the different traditional commentaries and writings on this concept, and starting with Maimonides. Maimonides writes that Mashiach will be a human being who lives amongst human beings, who will rise to that level, and he can come every day or any time. Now, how can that be, that Mashiach, living amongst us, can come any day unless he is somebody that we know and can identify? It's almost clear from Maimonides, and Maimonides says this, that in previous generations, in the time of the authors of the Mishnah, and throughout history, we've always looked to a certain individual in the Jewish community who was a spiritual leader of a very high level, and considered him the potential Mashiach. In order to accept Messiah as a reality, you have to accept as well that he's amongst us and he can come. Because how can he come if he's a human being and he can come any day and he's not here? Then where's he going to come from? So Chabad Hasidim, and I think many other Jews in the world who have seen the work of the Lubavitcher Rebbe as being a tremendous force within Judaism, have said if there's a Mashiach today amongst us, this is the man.
Let me, I know we're running out of time, let me, from a Christian perspective, ask a very practical question. Here, both of you are rabbis. What are a few of the salient differences in your beliefs?
I'll let...
Yeah.
Well, a number of things would be that I would not look to the Rebbe exactly the way Yossi would, although I certainly consider him a great scholar and saint of our time. I think as a conservative Jew, I would be much more prone to adapt, to look for the loopholes, as Yossi mentioned, to try to make it a little easier to express one's Judaism, rather than saying, no, we're going to toe the harder line and follow the most traditional reading. I think that I would use secular sources more comfortably than Yossi would in terms of my education, the education of our children. I think that probably, Yossi would tend to be probably much more strict in terms of Jewish ritual. Mm-hmm. I'm going to have to make an abrupt break because I'm getting the signal, and I have to make the commercial, and then maybe we can sort of summarize. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to hear from you. And there is an address which appears on the screen. If you would like to drop a line, drop one to For Heaven's Sake, WJXT, P.O. Box 5270, Jacksonville, Florida, 32207. We love hearing from you. Criticisms, suggestions, subjects of programs, and we do take the time to answer each and every piece of correspondence that we receive. See, very quickly, the time is short. In one sentence, Chabad also has an outreach to non-Jewish people. How would you summarize it in one sentence?
Well, Chabad believes that, and again, I think it's going back really to traditional Judaism that believes this. Chabad is only probably the one that's saying it the loudest, because not looking for the comfortable way, but doing things to the extreme. That the Judaism also has a way for a non-Jew to conduct himself, and that's the 7 Noahide laws, by which even a non-Jew should conduct himself, and that's the way the minimum way for them to serve God.
And on that note, we thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week.